I'm joined by the former Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog and a very well-known face in the economic circle. Joining me on ET now is Mr. Arvind Panagariya. So many thanks for speaking to us and taking your time out. Let me first begin by asking you about the 72,000 rupees per annum promise that the Congress party is talking about in their manifesto. I was reading somewhere where you said that, you know, this is going to have a huge burden fiscally on the government if at all they come to power. But the Congress's argument is more of a moral argument. They want to reach out to the 20% people, the poorest of the poor. They're talking about a committee that will be put in place. How do you see this?
Let me just say, you know, I'm going to be a little bit mischievous here. You know, if the Congress really believed its moral argument, we would not be where we are today. I think, you know, from 1950 onwards, if the Congress had really followed proper pro-growth policies, just like South Korea, Taiwan, China, all of which actually had about the same per capita income as us, we too actually would have had similar growth, and our per capita incomes would be significantly higher. Right. And poverty as we define it today would simply not be there. So, you know, I think if one really seriously believes in the moral argument, one has to also then answer for what was done in the first 3 to 4 decades. Now, that's a sort of my mischievous kind of response. But the more serious one is that, look, you know, we all believe, we all want to help the poor, and, you know, and particularly when we are talking about the destitute, the bottom 20% really are the destitute. Nobody in this country, particularly in India, but probably anywhere else either, would be against such policy. So that's not, you know, but somebody has to also explain how do we implement such a large scheme in a short period, like 2 years is what is being proposed. So I think that's really the issue. So,
you know, I understand the argument where you're saying that perhaps the NYAY scheme is the new age Garibi Hatao. But I was yesterday speaking to the chairman of the Congress Manifesto Committee, former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram as well. And he was saying that, you know, we're going to put a committee in place. We will ensure that the rollout of the scheme happens in phases. Do you believe that will perhaps, and perhaps even look at combining the subsidies, which, you know, and taking it on a merit basis? Look, do you buy that argument?
No, I don't. Because, look, you know, they say they have been, the Congress President, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, actually said that they've been working on the scheme for 6 months. Then their data analytics head, Praveen Chakravarti, says they've been working on it for 3 months, and they've been seeking help on so many economists and all. But I know we ought to have at least the broad outlines, how this revenue is going to be collected. I think all we have heard is the generalities, and I certainly don't see how all this adds up. You know, I mean, that they'll do some sort of simplification of the GST. They think that the economy can grow much faster, although for the last 5 years they have been so down on the performance of the economy. So if they really, their belief is that the economy is in fact doing so well, and then it can grow still further, there is a bit of a contradiction here. But even then, you know, you can raise the growth rate from maybe, let's say, current 7% to maybe 8%, 9%. But, you know, ultimately, how does it add up to 3.6 trillion rupees additional revenue to finance this scheme? I think this is where.
So do you believe the 3% fiscal target that that we keep talking about will completely go off the radar, and perhaps we will have to look at new sources of revenue, perhaps taxing the rich?
Well, that is what they need to spell out. This is precisely what I am saying, that, look, you know, where is the at least outline of the proposal, outline of this is how, you know, roughly, without cutting. No, remember that, because they also said they will not cut any of the existing subsidies. Right. They will not raise the taxes.
They said merit-based subsidies, we'll see what needs to be done to that.
They have to say it, right? I mean, this is generalities. But the point is that, ultimately when the push comes to shove, which subsidies are they going to cut? How much? Will that generate additional resources?
So the devil is in the detail, and the detail has not been provided.
At least, I'm not asking all micro details, but at least some broad, because we are talking 3.6 trillion rupees.
Right.
And so one has to have some big ticket items on which you peg these kinds of resources.
Absolutely. So I understand that argument of yours. Let me shift focus from the NYAY scheme, to another big issue this election season. Everybody keeps asking where are the jobs. The Congress's manifesto talks a lot about what their plan is with respect to jobs. The incumbent government says that the job crisis is a big myth. How do you see things like this?
Well, I've said this many times and I'll repeat it that, I don't think unemployment is India's big problem. It's the underemployment. Because, given the level of poverty, everybody has to do something.
Right.
I mean, you got to make your ends meet and you got to have 2 meals a day. So everybody does work. So in this sense, unemployment rate in India has always been low, and I believe that that's the case. But it's the underemployment. People are doing very low productivity jobs.
Right.
And that gives them relatively low wages, so low living standards, and therefore poverty. So this is where we need jobs that pay good wages, meaning higher productivity jobs.
Absolutely. The Congress party in their manifesto also talks about how they will look to fill up 4 lakh vacancies that are currently there in central government. And once the government will do that, the state governments will also follow suit. You've been at the Niti Aayog. You know how the relationship works between the centre and the state. How easy or difficult is it going to be? Once the centre does it, do the states follow suit?
Well, this again is an issue also. Fiscal issue still comes back.
Absolutely.
Right? 400,000 additional jobs, additional people that you put up on payroll. Well, salaries will have to be paid. So it's not so automatic. I mean, if it was merely a matter of employing them on the rolls of the government, then why stop at 400,000? I mean, make it 4 million. Right? But we know and you know that you can't afford fiscally to employ that many people, right? So government, increasing significantly employment in government is not the solution. It is the economy that has to grow, economy that has to specifically give an impetus to labor-intensive manufacturing and labor-intensive services where good jobs can be created. So you need good policies. Which is my really complaint is that where are the good policies? I think the manifesto has to tell us what are the policy changes that the Congress government will make, which will generate good jobs.
But do you agree with the argument of the incumbent government when they say the job crisis is a myth? You've said that underemployment is a big problem. Where are the low-hanging fruits then? What is it that the government of the day needs to do?
Well, my take on this is I'm not in the government, so I speak for myself really. So my take it is that we still need to do a lot of the factor market reforms, Land Acquisition Act that needs to be amended to make it a little more, a little easier and cheaper to acquire land. You need labor law reforms. There's banking sector reform is extremely important.
Right.
To clean up all the NPAs. I think fantastic beginning has been made now, and good progress has been made in the last 1 year, but that needs to be taken to its conclusion. And these are the things, all the factor market reforms that would help bring in growth in the formal sector. So, existing firms will get larger, new larger firms will enter the market, and particularly in the labor intensive sector. So that those firms will then also be exporters. One of the important ingredients has to be that exchange rate, the GST rebates being given on time, the working capital not getting stuck. All these things need to be done so that the exporters can truly become competitive, super competitive in the global markets, because that's where the big market is. There's a $17 trillion market only in goods, and then you got another 4 or 5 trillion in services. So that's where we have to make a big break.
Maybe that will come in the second, the second stage of reforms if the government comes back. But let me now talk about another important issue. Economists across the world are questioning the credibility of Indian data. This has become a big issue. This has become a big talking point. The credibility of the data that the government is coming out, whether it is on jobs, whether it is on GDP. This was usually an issue that countries like China were facing globally. Now, India's also, questions are being raised on Indian data as well. You are looking at India, you've been in India, you've seen how the government functions. Now, you are speaking to people outside as well. What's their own sense? Are they believing in the data in India that India is generating?
Look, I mean, all the international agencies, including the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, they are all using these data. They have not said anything about, raised any doubts about the data. It's, I think, our own cynical economists who are raising these questions about.
You would say there's smoke without fire. It's all propaganda.
Yes. Well, largely so, because Indian statistical agencies are very independent, and I was inside the government for 3 years. Never, I mean, when the GDP data came, basically the chief statistician would brief me an hour or 2 hours before the data, and that was only for the information, because all journalists will ask me questions, so I should be a little better prepared. That was the main reason I used to find out maybe 2 hours before the press conference that he would do, and the same for the principal secretary and sort of the PMO and so forth. So, I don't get it. Just because the GDP growth rate, for example, in 2016-17 bumps up to 8.2%, you begin doubting the data. I mean, maybe you should doubt your own analysis, which is telling you that GDP growth rate should not be 8.2%. I mean, why do you doubt? The tax revenues had actually revised tax revenues had gone up.
But other people who've also been in the government, like former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan, he's also questioned the validity of the data and saying that if the government does not have an issue, then why don't you come out and explain what is the methodology?
Precisely. He is asking questions. Let him go. There is a 40-page document that must be issues which explains what their methodology is. So those who have a problem, let them come in and point out, tell this step is wrong. I am all for improvements in methodology. By the way, the new methodology was not adopted somehow. Somebody imagined suddenly we went to a new methodology. A committee was appointed actually under the UPA government, which made the recommendations, based on which and why the committee was appointed, because there were a lot of complaints, a lot of criticisms of the old methodology. So this was meant to have brought about the improvements.
But even the former chief economic advisor Arvind Subramanian had also raised questions on the methodology of the GDP.
Well, let him also come in and tell what does he find objectionable.
True.
Everything I have heard basically also attacks the level of the GDP. Well, it's not so easy to unpack also the growth rate of the GDP.
Right.
Level and the growth rate are two different things. So, if I might change the level, but how do I change the growth rate? So, it's just that the data and the numbers in the end turn out that way. But you have to focus on what are the desirable changes. Now, if somebody will come in and make a good convincing argument that, look, this change you made was incorrect, you shouldn't have made this change. There is a 40-page document, you can look it up and then tell. So, nobody in their right minds would object to a change which will improve the quality of the data. I think that is perfectly fine. But all these motives that are assigned, your 108 economists there, I mean, where is the evidence? I mean, do they have some positive evidence that the government actually fudged the data and therefore this change happened? I think you got to have some objective evidence.
Right. Let me also talk about the world over. A lot of global multilateral agencies are downgrading global growth. They're saying that perhaps we were anticipating higher growth, but we're not moving in tandem with what our expectations was. Even if you look at India, there seems to be a slowdown in the auto sector. In your view, where do you see things headed in the next 1 or 2 years? Where do you think, how do you think the growth is going to shape up?
Yeah. So, I think for India, I have always maintained that what happens to India's growth very much depends on what India does.
Right.
It helps if the global economy is also growing rapidly, but even if global economy stagnates a bit, the basic point is that why does global economy matter? Because that determines how large the market is. Now, the global market is already extremely large.
Right.
The merchandise exports is $17 trillion. So, suppose it shrinks because growth is not happening, maybe instead of going from 17 to 19 trillion in 5 years, maybe it will go to only 18.
Right.
But India's problem is not that size, that pie is already very large. What share of that pie does India have? Just 1.7%. Compare that to China's 12%. Now, that is where the big action has to be, that can we make that 1.7 into 3% or 4% over the next 5 to 8 year period.
And what part of the pie are we able to capture at the end of the day? I get your point on that. Dr. Panagariya, you've been there at the Niti Aayog as the vice chairman, and now a lot of questions are being raised this election season on whether Niti Aayog has fulfilled its intended objectives or not. The Trinamool Congress in their manifesto in fact talks about there is a need for a leaner version of the Planning Commission. The Congress party is talking about it. Clearly Niti Aayog is in the middle of all of this election season. How do you see that criticism coming in? I mean, the kind of work that Niti Aayog has done, do you believe it has met its objective?
Well, let me, on this one, since I was obviously a part of the Niti Aayog only about a year and a half ago, I would not comment on this.
But do you think it has fulfilled the void that earlier was there when the Planning Commission was there?
As I said, I mean, I would like there to be my successor at least, one successor removed for me to comment. Here, I mean, I've constantly said this, that look, I follow the Kelkar rule, which is my good friend Vijay Kelkar. He says that, you don't comment on the predecessor, you don't comment on the successor. So I'll leave it at that. I think, we can, maybe another couple of years later, I'll have something to say.